Hey, good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I have everybody muted, and it looks like there's still people joining, so I'm going to sit tight for just another minute. I've opened up the chat screen, and I've asked a couple of questions just to see if everybody can see my screen that I'm sharing here for the broadcast. And I've got the Q&A panel open. Good morning. This is Mark Woolbright with Greenwall Ventures, and I'll be putting on this webinar this morning. And this is an ongoing series of informative webinars by me. I shouldn't be introducing myself, but I'm a living wall consultant and inventor, longtime inventor and business owner in the living wall arena for the last 25 years or so. And now I'm functioning as a living wall consultant through Greenwall Ventures, which is a consulting entity that I've had for a number of years. Anyway, it looks like I've got a couple of messages here that people can hear me, and I evidently see the screen, so that's good. When I'm doing this on my own, it's always hard to get the feedback that you need to make sure that you're accurate with everything. So what I will do is just start off and say that we had an initial webinar a month ago, and almost exactly a month ago, and in that one there, it's recorded, and I think I sent the link out to everybody that if they wanted to look at it. There were a few glitches in it, so you'll have to kind of speed through some of that, but should be valuable, and we gave some really good information. And then that webinar was kind of preceded by a blog post on our blog, on our website at greenwallventures.com. And then I've also posted information relative to that initial webinar out around social media and our different resources. And I'm doing the same thing for this one, the second one. This one we're going to talk about maintenance. And it's a huge topic and not a topic that we can really cover effectively in an hour. But it gives you an idea where to go, and you can always, call with questions and such. Obviously, I'm a consultant, and I'm looking for work in this regard. So, if you've got a project that's particularly difficult and you'd like some assistance, give me a call and engage our services. So I get a little good morning from Paul, and thank you so much, and looks like he can hear me just fine. That reminds me, I want to mention how I want to handle question and answer. I love questions throughout these webinars, and they make them more dynamic, and you'll certainly draw more information out of me. It makes a better webinar. And of course, this one's recorded, and I'll be posting it, so you can review it later, and we'll also send out our certificates of attendance. But I have a slide in here, just like last time, that prompts me to open up the Q&A session. And it's before we get to the very end, so that I make sure that we don't run out of time, and I'm mindful of everybody's need to get some questions answered. And I'm sure that this topic is going to have some questions. And I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm going to be glossing over some major pieces of information. So if I get a question throughout the body of this and I feel like it can be answered and continue my flow of the presentation, I'll handle it right then and there. Otherwise, I'll defer until we get to the Q&A time, and then we'll cover every one of them live so that you can all hear how they get answered together. So with that said, it looks like we've got a pretty good chunk of people in. And thank you all for attending this morning and registering, and I'm very excited and pleased to put this webinar series on. So let's get going. It's funny, these computers, they, for whatever reason, when you hit the first slide, they just don't go. There we go. Okay, we're off and running. So I do a little bit of recap on the front end of this, because there are many people that are probably on for the first time and didn't make the last webinar. So I like to redo the front end, and then the midsection and the back end are the meat of the new topic. So, why select living walls? And why do I love them? That's kind of material to why I'm here, really. So, green infrastructure. A living wall is part of green infrastructure, and they're emerging as effective tools for reversing or remediating environmental damage. So how do they fit in? Well, they're a BMP, just like a rain garden, a bioswale, permeable pavement, green roofs, other LID, low impact development methods. So they're a tool in the project designer's toolbox. And of course, nobody can be well versed on every tool in the toolbox. And that's why I put these on, and that's why we offer our services. Now, living walls, although I love them in all conditions, they're not a magic bullet, and they're part of a strategy to treat the planet better in an effort to help ourselves. And they can fit nicely into many green building projects, whether they be as part of the landscape outside the building, vertical walls inside the building, walls and screens attached to the building for a lot of reasons. But to be effective, they have to be well thought out and well executed. And that's kind of the basis of these presentations and why they're directed towards really specifiers. So, you know, the minute the word living is used, it becomes all about plants. I mean, that's the big differentiator there from a non-living wall of any kind to living, is you've got plants growing on it that modifies the structure. And plants have always fascinated me, and their ability to transform the perception and function of a typical needed structure. And that's been my mission to educate in this niche for many years. You know, in design circles, we see all these buzzwords all the time: biophilia, biomimicry, maybe not so much related to the plants, but green space, ecology, sustainability, and plants are central in all those buzzwords. And these movements now, you know, they're really all about bringing plants into close proximity with people. Humans are embracing plants in our spaces like never before. We're finding lots of ways to use them in close proximity to where we work and where we live. And we're seeing studies almost daily, at least I am, because I look for this, that come out that show all the differences in air quality and runoff water quality and urban cooling in these hot urban areas, but also in cognitive abilities and stress reduction inside a building, in the workplace, overall health, test scores for kids in schools. I mean, so we're putting these living walls within buildings, on buildings, outside buildings, holding up streets or as part of streetscapes, highways, even roofs. And on roofs, they can even be vertical, and it can increase the capacity of a roof area to grow food in its limited space and increase food security in the local region. So lots of stuff and lots of reasons why I love them. So just to say, all the benefits and intentions of the living wall are achievable. They really are achievable. So if a specifier fully understands and controls the variables of a proposed wall, they can achieve all the benefits aesthetically and environmentally. And this webinar session is going to shed some light on living wall maintenance. And we're going to discuss several determining factors and offer a few strategies for success. And that's where we could go on and on for days on that. And who knows how the Q&A is going to go. So I love that living walls come in many forms and service capacities, and all of them depend on healthy plants for success. And a lot like these beauties that are coming up next, just good sector examples. Living structural walls for roadways and bridges. That's an awesome project. Site landscaping walls that affect the occupants even inside the building. Living walls can be built in just about any climate. This is in very dry Southern Cal. And you know, reinforce steep slopes for erosion control and habitat restoration. This is along a river in the southeast. And then, you know, they come in lots of other forms too. You know, they can be wire walls, which many people in the engineering business have seen these things for a long time, and concrete crib walls that have been around for a long time. But, you know, what happens is if you've got healthy plants growing in them and all the other markers of success have been met, then they're going to disappear behind healthy, natural, beautiful plants. And living vertical walls for gardening, farming, inside or outside a building, even roofs. And then, you know, of course, vertical living walls for small private spaces and even large indoor public spaces. That's an incredible, you know, patio area there. That is a stunner. outdoors, and then look at this one indoors, and that of course is filtering quite a bit of the air in the building, and it makes a huge impact on the interior aspect of the building. So living walls really are you know, kind of tough to talk about. People used to call my office and say, I've got a question about a living wall, and I would say, well, what kind? Because there's so many, really. But it's what I'd like to point out is that my perspective on living walls is very different. I look at them from a different perspective than just about anybody else that I know. A lot of people understand them because they install them or they sell them, but they don't look at them as critically as I do. And my role as a consultant with no product alliances now enables me to be very objective. You know, I'm an inventor, and that's how I kind of started out in my professional life after college. And I've got a number of patents in the living wall area, and I've got some patents that are going through the process right now that have been applied for. So I look at living walls through the eyes of an inventor and product designer. So I'm always looking at ease of manufacture, ease of installation, the materials they're built out of, how sustainable are they, how easy is it to install the systems and their effect on labor and maintenance, and then their effect on plant health. And you know, the ultimate success of a living system is always in the designer's control, either the product designer or the system project designer at an engineering firm, an architecture firm, a landscape architecture firm. So, and they can all be successful if the variables are looked at correctly. So today's topic was preceded by a blog post on my Greenwall Mojo blog. And it's kind of funny. I call it the M word, maintenance. You know, the mere mention of it has been a deal closer in the wrong direction for my entire career in the living wall niche. And when I say that, I mean that you know, there's always a lot of excitement in the design community, and even owners and project teams would be very excited about the opportunity to add living walls either inside or outside of a building. But then when the word maintenance comes up, it seems to be the big differentiator between a living wall and a non-living wall, and it's a deal killer or deal closer in the wrong direction a lot of times. So if this niche is going to grow, we have to get past the maintenance issues, the maintenance questions, the maintenance fear. So let's just start off and say, like the last webinar, I talked about product selection for plant health. Well, here we've got product selection, but it's in terms of maintenance. You know, every living wall system needs to address maintenance, and well thought out systems are not afraid to answer tough questions. And by following the steps, maintenance is minimal and success is high. But that's with systems that fully understand the, you know, how their wall is maintained and economized. So, you know, how much care is needed to provide long-term plant health and ensure the facing is really covered in healthy plants? And then what's that going to cost? Well, it's different for every system, every type of system, and every project, because they're all in different locations with different variables. So there's no one catch-all answer here, and that's why this is a big topic. I will say that in my opinion, you know, maintenance seems to engage fear, you know, fear of failure, unmet design expectations that can overshadow the benefits of a living wall system and then prevent the thing from happening in the first place. And that's a bummer for us, as you can see my points here. But designers, what they need is they need positive and complete answers from product vendors or their trade organizations in order to create a game plan that can be written into the specifications to ensure success. You know, if somebody comes at this because they're enamored with a living wall, and let's say the owner of a project is going for LEED certification, and of course you're looking for, as a designer, anything that fits within that, and of course living walls will you know, go towards points in a variety of categories on a LEED project. But you know, at that point, the designer probably doesn't have all the information available to them to know what the variables are, to know what questions to ask, and to write the type of specification that's going to ensure success. And that's why, you know, advocacy like I'm doing, and information dissemination like these webinars goes a long way. And of course, I'm overall a big fan of living walls as a niche, and so I'll do just about anything to bring proficiency up. And you can't forget about the role of proper microclimate assessment and plant selection. So a living wall, whether it's outside or inside, it's going to be affected by light and climatic conditions, region of the country. Inside could be by humidity or lack thereof, and of course the plant selection. People can pick beautiful plants, but maybe they don't all work together in the same space. Maybe they have different water needs, different light needs, different growth habits create different maintenance needs. So there's a lot to look at just in terms of proper assessment of the project and what plants are going to go the best in there. That is a biggie right there. But that can all get done before the project ever gets built. Vertical living wall business does a better job of positively discussing maintenance. And I'll tell you why. In my opinion, it's because a lot of the installers of vertical living walls end up being companies that are in the plantscape and plant maintenance business. And so they understand maintenance better. They're able to offer a maintenance contract as well. And so they can define it a whole lot better. And so even though a vertical living wall is more expensive per square foot of face area than a structural living wall, I mean, by a long shot, the maintenance is better understood, and the vertical living walls tend to be right in proximity with humans, and so people get more excited about them. They can define the variables a lot easier, and the deals close more readily. Their issue really is expense, and a lot of times budgets have to be cut at the end, and the vertical living walls come out as a result of that. But I will say, after 25 plus years practicing, I think that's one advantage that vertical living wall systems have over structural living wall systems, is that they just are able to talk about the M word, the maintenance, more effectively than their structural counterparts. It's more undefined for structural living walls because a lot of the companies that build structural living walls don't do maintenance. They're not in the plant business. They're site work contractors. Even the landscape contractors that build the walls are really centered around building these structures, but not necessarily planting them and maintaining them. And so it's a little bit fractured, and the trade organizations don't represent it very well either. So it really goes to the product and the system manufacturer, and how good do they understand their system and strategies for maintenance and cost of maintenance. So without these questions being clearly defined, then it pumps up the fear of failure, fear of unknown cost, and that's what causes these things to be taken out of the plans at the end. So on the blog, I threw out a couple of questions, a few questions to ponder. Does living wall maintenance cost a fortune compared to a non-living wall? How big of an impact is it really? And do living walls pay any dividends, or do they simply just increase cost? How can maintenance costs be controlled or predicted? Where does maintenance cost really begin? Does it begin when the project's built, or does it really begin when it's being designed on the drawing board? Almost that's really an answer better than question number 5. What factors drive the maintenance cost, and can the specifier manage them? And does product selection and job site execution impact the long-term cost of maintenance? So those are, that's 7 pretty broad questions that would each take an hour to answer, and they're going to be different answers based on the project. But we're going to take a whack at those here. The 7 questions are really more undefined in the structural and landscape living walls, but they also hold true for many of the vertical systems as well. Answers to question number 1, and that's, does living wall maintenance cost a fortune compared to non-living wall? Well, maintenance does cost money, and there's no surprise there when you're intentionally keeping plants alive and healthy. Living wall care starts as soon as the wall is built, versus nothing right away for a non-living wall. But you know, and the point you'll see me make here in a minute is that a non-living wall still has maintenance. It's even less defined than the living wall. I mean, the living wall is sort of screaming, hey, I need maintenance. So there's a cost assigned with it. The non-living wall, it's a little more hidden. So living wall care is usually less costly than other items such as turf and landscape beds on a project. Now, also too, if you're talking about inside of a building, a vertical living wall inside of a building a lot of times can be less costly to maintain than plants that are strewn around a facility, let's say an atrium of a building or in a large shopping mall, where the maintenance crew is going to have to move around. They might have several minutes of travel with all their gear in between each location, where a vertical living wall tends to be, you know, stuck in one spot, and it's you know, you set up on it and you can get to everything pretty quick and easy. The same thing really holds true for a structural living wall as well. I mean, generally speaking, you know, you've got a grounds crew that is maintaining turf and planting beds and shrubbery and trimming things, and so the structural living wall kind of fits in there nicely, and that it's just a little bit of an add-on to what the maintenance crew is already going to do, but they're there in close proximity, and so it's not a big upcharge. So structural living walls can cost anywhere from $1 a square foot to $3 a square foot of face area per year. So just simple math, you know, you got 1,000 square foot structural living retaining wall, let's say, outside the entrance of a building. And if it's easy to get to, and the plant selection has been really good, and it gets the water that it needs and all the other factors that it needs, then, you know, it could cost maybe $1 a square foot per year to maintain, which would then equate into $1,000 a square foot. And that could be a standalone contract, or that could be just an upcharge with the existing site maintenance crew. Now, when they're larger, harder to access, they're not getting everything that they really need to be successful, and so they need more help. Maybe they're scattered all around the site, or no easy access to water, and water has got to be trucked in. Then they could go all the way up to maybe $3 a square foot or more. I've priced out over the years a whole lot of living wall maintenance, and you know, those aren't big numbers really. You know, a structural living wall is going to cost installed anywhere from maybe $18 a square foot all the way up to maybe, you know, $35 or $40 a square foot, depending on size and scope and structure and plants. So really, when you're adding $1 to $3 a square foot annually for the maintenance of that, it's not a big item. Now, vertical walls, they're all over the board, plenty of variables, a lot of variables, and height is the big one, height and accessibility. But they're going to be, you know, in my experience anyway, and it could be way outside this range too, but they're going to be $10 a square foot to $30 a square foot of face area per year. So that's a big range, and it's quite a bit more than the structural counterpart. You know, the structural counterpart, it's just way cheaper all the way around, and it kind of blows my mind. You know, for a structural living wall, it's just like a regular retaining wall. You've got earth movers coming in, cutting out the earth and prepping the site, and you've got, you know, big moving equipment moving in structural backfill and vibratory compaction equipment and everything, all these things going on, and these walls get built for, you know, $18 to $35 a square foot, whereas a vertical wall inside of a building in a nice controlled climate ends up being more along the lines of you know, $150 to $250 a square foot. So I guess it's not you know, it's a matter of scale. The maintenance cost of a vertical living wall tends to be a similar percentage to what I'm showing here on the structural walls. So let's look at answer number two, or answer to question number two. How big of an impact is it really And does a living wall pay any dividends or simply increase cost? Well, I've used these photos in presentations for years and years, and one is a solid concrete wall, and the other one is an open face plantable wall. And of course, visually you can see the difference. But the solid wall, it's giving you earth retention. But it's also increasing urban heat island. They're accumulating the sun's energy, and they're increasing stormwater runoff because they're not going to absorb any stormwater runoff. They're going to shed it. So, you know, they're sold as no maintenance items, but weeds do grow in the cracks. Backfill fines and salts bleed onto the face, look bad, and a lot of times have to be power washed off. These are really good billboards for graffiti, and that has to be covered, removed, remediated. And when they're not permeable, somebody's got to pay that cost, because that just exacerbates the runoff to the sewer structures. So it increases the sizing of the sewer structures and makes a big effect on the wastewater treatment systems. So they're really not free after they're built. Then you've got the living wall, which nobody sees it as free. I make the point here, there's no such thing as a free puppy. And this beauty here will have to be maintained. But this wall in particular, it was planted with vines, and it was wisely planted with vines in that it was a good regional vine that would take hold, get a good root mass, and then would grow and crawl all over the place. So you get tons of redundancy. So if you get one or two vines that die in a pocket, that pocket quickly gets covered over by another one that's aggressively growing. So you don't really see a plant replacement issue or dead spots in the wall. And you can even use multiple species of vines to kind of hedge your bets against disease or some type of chemical being sprayed on there that might be toxic to one and not the other. So there are strategies to use locally available vines like this to cover up a wall. And so that cuts a lot of costs down in the planting and maintenance and care of these walls just right off the bat. They cost way less on the front end. There's way less maintenance intensity to maintain these, and certainly way less than maintaining the turf and the surface level planting beds. But then there's a big list of positives that really is just now being quantified by the industry. So in addition to earth retention, like the other wall, you've got green space, habitat, urban cooling, you're decreasing stormwater runoff, you're treating stormwater runoff by the plants absorbing it and transpiring it and pulling and processing pollutants out of it. You've got carbon sequestration by the plants back into the ground. And you've got improved air quality in these areas. And the same things really hold true for a vertical living wall inside of a building or outside of a building as well. If it's exterior and it's on the building, you're going to get urban cooling, you're going to get habitat, green space, you're going to absorb runoff water, and you're going to treat runoff water, and you're going to sequester carbon and improve the air. I mean, the same things happen inside or outside of a building with the vertical as well. So there are a lot of common denominators to living walls of all types. So now we go to answers to questions 3 through 7. And that seems pretty darn broad, I know, but maintenance cost should be put in perspective to other costs on a project and not just left to look like a big extra hanging out there. I mean, that's probably the biggest deal killer really, is when maintenance is totally excluded from the conversation until the end when the project's ready to bid. And then all of a sudden it looks like this big extra that nobody wants to pay for. So my solution years ago was, how about adding 1 to 2 years of maintenance costs to the initial bid package? When I was a product vendor, a lot of times we would be trying to sell these living walls for projects that were ultimately going to be owned or maintained by a local municipality. which would be like, local roadways and streetscapes and things like that. And they would, quickly say, hey, we've got a maintenance budget here. Our city crews do maintenance, but we don't have a budget that includes this wall, and we don't know how to define it. And therefore, we can't, increase our budget, based on some undefined item. So how do you handle that? Well, in order to close the deal, what we came up with was that we just take a look at what it was going to cost to maintain this thing for a year, 2 years, 3 years, with the goal being to turn it over after it had a well-defined maintenance cost history, and maintenance intensity went down because the plants became mature and were growing over the wall, and they'd proven to be wisely selected and healthy and happy in that location. So when it got turned over to the agency that would own it, they knew what the maintenance had cost. They knew, that the intensity was going down, and they knew they weren't going to have to budget near as much going forward. The other thing I'd say is, yes, the obvious is that when you do that, you increase the initial cost of a project, and therefore making it even more costly than a non-living alternative. However, most of the time, an owner or a client project team, they're only looking to specify a living wall if there's a driver there, if they want the environmental benefit, if there's codes and regulations that are mandating those types of environmental tools, let's say, to be built into the site. So if there's a driver there, really the non-living option is not the number one option. They know they're going to spend a little bit more, perhaps, in order to have a living wall and all the benefits that brings. So adding like a per square foot maintenance cost into the product cost on bid day is a smart play, because that's a budget that can be defined on the front end. And then it takes the stress and the fear out for everybody, because they know they're not going to have to deal with that wall until it's mature and grown over and looking good a year or 2 or 3 down the road. So that would be my strategy I toss out there, and certainly it's worth discussing later. I would also say that vendors, let's see if this will blow up. Yeah, vendors and trade associations, they need to develop maintenance cost ranges for their products, basically, and the niches that they serve, in order for their sales volumes to grow. We're in a time right now where the economy's running hot. Building is everywhere. Concerns about the environment and environmental awareness is everywhere. So if you're a vendor with a living wall product, you need to jump on top of this maintenance issue and develop the way you talk about maintenance with designers and project teams right away, so that your sales volumes can grow as they should in these times. So I will say this: maintenance begins with the wall designer. No doubt about it, and if you saw my last webinar, we talked about, what constitutes, a well-designed product that's worthy of specification. And that was all kind of centered around plant health. And there are a lot of vendors that just sort of gloss it over. Their systems are really designed for structure, not plant health. And so they leave all the rest of that conversation up to some other, and it doesn't get handled well. So, if a designer knows what questions to ask, and they're dealing with vendors that can answer those questions well, so they're using, well-designed products, then you can understand the variables, and you can write a spec around these things that will cut most of the maintenance out just with your verbiage, and will really guarantee success down the road once the system is built and in place. Hold on here. So if all the variables are controlled and the best practices are specified up front, with well-designed products, maintenance will be cut to the bone before the wall even gets built. And I kind of said that before in another way, but I get pretty jazzed up about this, and so sometimes I get ahead of myself. But really and truly, if everything is looked at properly as the wall's being designed and the spec is written properly, you can beat almost all the maintenance issues out of a project before it gets built. Now, the last thing is it's got to get constructed per the plans and specs, and all directives have to be followed. Now, I put in here, I can tell some horror stories. I mean, I can just tell you, I've had living walls where, everything was inspected from a structural standpoint. Nothing was inspected during construction from a living standpoint. Being like irrigation. The inspector might have seen irrigation tubing on the job and seen it going in some places, but they probably didn't look, I've seen it, they didn't look at, were the guys really installing the irrigation properly and making the right connections and using the right fittings, and then the job is built, and it turns out later that you try to turn on the irrigation system and it doesn't work because it's incomplete or it's not been put in right. And then of course the fingers get pointed. Okay, well, who was supposed to inspect that? Whose fault is that? Those things just shouldn't happen. It's just such a bummer to see that when everything else is followed and the cost is built into the project, and it still is unsuccessful because it didn't get built right. So that would be my last point on that. So we're a little past the midpoint in the time today. It's 11:36 my time, and it's a question and answer time. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to really talk this through. This is my favorite part. I'm not going to launch a poll today. If you tuned into the last one, I did have a 7-question poll, and it was very helpful to understand my audience. I didn't really feel the need to do that on this one. Let's see. And while I'm giving you a chance to perhaps, post a question or two, I'll put up this slide here that just talks about future webinar topics. I think how to promote to clients. I think a lot of times a client might bring it up and they're just not sure. And I would love to talk about strategies to promote living walls to clients and grow the niche. I'd love to do one where we really dig into the costs and the actual monetary and environmental benefits of a living wall. And I've got some good data on that as well. Today we're talking about maintenance and maintenance strategies. Job site installation issues, that's a biggie. I've spent a lot of time on job sites over the last 25 years, and I would love to talk more deeply on that. I'd also like to really differentiate each living wall type, and maybe even do a webinar on each living wall type. Structural walls that come in, near vertical, steep slope, flatter slope, bank protections and such, creek banks, beach and stream banks, but also then the vertical living walls, vertical farming. I'd love to talk about all that. And then just sort out all the different vertical offerings, inside, outside, edible, ornamental. There's just so much. I've got a couple of questions here. Paul Kulik, he wished me good morning and thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Scott Martinez asked, are there any specific requirements for soil amendments for living walls, and how much do they vary based on the type of wall system? Well, that's a big question, actually. Let me answer that one. Let me go ahead and answer that one live. Like in the terms of a structural living wall, let's say one that's near vertical, or even one that's a reinforced steep slope. It depends on the media that you're using in the face. So if you're using some type of site available soil, you probably should have it tested, and you probably need to take a look at those test results versus the plants that you'd like to plant in that wall, what's been selected. And you can always amend that by blending in some type of organic material. Or I'm a big fan of blending in compost, but there's a lot of synthetic things that can be added in as well. Or it can be fertilized topically after everything is built, but you really have to know the properties of the soil you're dealing with on the front end. So it's good to you know, obtain that material and send it to a lab and get some tests run on it. The other thing would be even in using compost. You know, not all compost is the same. So you've got to get your compost from somebody that's making it per the U.S. Composting Council guidelines, and they should have a test, a recent test on their compost. And you're going to want to understand the pH of the compost, the salt content in the compost, you know, the available nitrogen in the compost, and you may have to add some additional amendments for that. I don't see any of these things being a whole lot of money relative to the cost of the media at all. So I don't think it's anywhere close to a deal breaker. Really, the big deal breaker is to buy a bunch of plants and then pay for the labor to put the plants in and then have them die and then have to go back and remediate the wall. And then just to touch on the other side of the niche, like the vertical walls, a lot of vertical walls don't grow in soil and a lot of them do. I would say that soil amendment or nutrient addition is a big deal through the irrigation lines in vertical living walls, whether it's more of a hydroponic based system or more of a soil based system. And in a soil based system, you're definitely going to need to look at the properties of that growing media or soil. And again, it's good to have a test or some analysis directly from the vendor. So let me know if that didn't work, and I can speak about it a little bit more. Let's see. John Gagliardo says, have you come across any projects where the, hang on here, let me answer this. Answer live, there we go. Have you come across any projects where the plants were detrimental to the structural components of the wall system? No, I haven't. That's a great question, though. You know, you hear people talk about how they don't like ivy growing on a building, but that's not the same in a living wall project. And I'm assuming that you're probably talking about a structural living wall system. So, you know, most of the systems that are, most of the plants that are going to be planted in those facings are going to lay on the face and crawl over the face and maybe even attach to the face, but not be detrimental. In an extreme case, I've seen trees growing out of structural living walls, and of course they were introduced there accidentally by birds or wind, and through lack of maintenance. Nobody went back and looked at it, and they didn't, you know, pluck that young tree out, and it got big. I haven't even seen that damage a wall. In terms of structure, the root structure of the large plant increases the structure of the retaining wall itself, and I haven't seen it displace the facing modules. In a vertical living wall system, you know, your goal is not to have any plants on the actual wall of a building. They're going to be off that on a specific structure created by the vertical living wall system, and so obviously the plants are going to be harmonious with that. So let me know if I got that right or not. And then let's see here. Scott Martinez asks, good information, thank you, I appreciate that. I kind of figured it was pretty site region specific, but wasn't sure if there was some sort of soil tackifier needed to keep it all in place. You know, that's a really good question. Well, you know, I've seen this a lot with wire walls, and it can happen too with concrete crib walls on the structural side, is that everything gets built and then they introduce plant material through hydroseeding. And so they're shooting, you know, kind of a mulch or slurry onto the face of that wall that's got a tackifier, and it's going to hold the seed to the face, and it's got some fertilizer in it and such, and some things to hold moisture, and that can be problematic. I mean, it definitely has low rates of germination success. And then, the plants germinate and, it depends on the way the wall then is built and the way it's been specified. Can the seed root into the soil that's contained in the face, and can it get through whatever barrier is holding the soil from being eroded? So, the very thing that holds the soil in could be the very thing that keeps the plants sprayed on the outside from growing and being successful. Mark Kavanaugh, have you used irrigation within a living wall? Yes. And all types of them too, by the way. I've used them in slope configuration structural walls. I've used them in near vertical configuration structural walls, and then in interior and exterior vertical living walls, inside the building, attached to the building and stuff. And, it's key. And I'm assuming, Mark, that you might be asking about a structural wall. In my last webinar, we talked about the ability to elegantly and inexpensively add drip irrigation to a living wall system, and that if a product is going to be deemed well designed and well suited for specification, one of my markers of success is, can it easily accept, and is it designed on the front end to accept drip irrigation? And if it's not, then they're probably not in the living wall business. My theory on irrigation is, if a client wants a really difficult plant choice that's going to require really good controlled irrigation, then go for it, and everybody should know that it's going to cost a little bit more. But if I'd say most of the time what I'm using irrigation in a living wall for is an insurance policy, because once you've gone to all the expense and the time to figure out what plants to go in there and then get them in, you don't want, some climate anomaly to wipe it out. You get a super hot drought period that happens when it shouldn't, or it stays too cold for too long when it shouldn't, and it could wipe you out. And so by having the irrigation system built in and the ability to use it when you need it, you can guide these young plants to maturity and good healthy root systems, to where if they're wisely chosen in the first place, they'll be fine once they don't have irrigation down the road. So a lot of times the drip irrigation systems that are put in these walls are just temporary or for the first year or two. And obviously, there are some locations, like some of these walls holding up roadways out in the middle of nowhere, there's no water. So you could have some sort of a poly tank that could be refilled by a water truck that could charge up a drip irrigation system. And there's a lot of strategies in order to get water to a wall out in the middle of nowhere. We've seen, irrigation used to great benefit on lots of different situations. So I hope that answered your question. And I hope now that I answered it, it doesn't cut me off. Okay, we're at 11:50. We got about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to move forward with the rest of this presentation. And really and truly, we talked about all these upcoming potential topics, and please reach out to me, send me an email, and let me know if there's something you really would like to see. I know last month there seemed to be kind of a consensus that soil was a big deal, and what is soil and what constitutes the right soil. That's a tough one to do in a webinar because it's so site specific, but I'm open to it. So shoot me an email, let me know what we can do to serve better in that regard. Now, there's a few things that you can do. You can become an advocate for living walls and take advantage of more vertical space. You can join our monthly webinars and increase your understanding and your ability to use living walls. You can also add us to your project team for good system review and specification writing, and even for going to the field and making sure that things are built properly. That's a small cost and big benefit. And this is a shot from our website here, and really that's the bulk of it, you know, or consultants for the green building market. And we can be your competitive edge when you're pursuing a project. You know, Living Wall Project Consulting, we can review and guide product selection, assistance, and then field inspection. One of the things we also do is we design product or enhance product or tweak existing product. So we are actively involved in designing some systems now for clients. So that's another area where we have expertise. And then if you really think, let's say you're with a large firm and you really think it'd be beneficial to have a dedicated education webinar for your team or even multi-offices, we provide that and we'd love to help out. So, you know, at this point, I'd like to say thanks for joining the webinar. You can review this topic on our blog, and I've got a link right here. If you can see where my mouse is, that's the link to the blog. This is now posted as a resource on our website. I'll be sending out certificates of attendance as well as you know, links to the recorded cloud-based version of this webinar. And what I would say is I started it a few minutes early, and then we had a little housekeeping in the front end. So probably that's going to be some dead space on the front end of the webinar. So just know that when you open that recording up, you'll need to kind of fast forward through maybe the first 2 or 3 minutes of that to get to the meat of it. And you know, that pretty much wraps it up for me, unless anybody has any additional questions. I don't see anything in the panel. We've still got a whole bunch of people that are on this thing, so I'll sit here for a minute in case a question comes up. I will mention this, I forgot to within the body of the presentation. You know, we talk about benefits of living walls and do they pay? I published on my Greenwall Ventures Facebook page an article I read the other day that came out of Europe that was on plants' ability to filter the air and processed waste and toxins out of the air, and it was fascinating. And I published the whole thing on my Facebook page, and I kind of spun it around social media. But you know, the gist of it was that not only do plants absorb pollutants from the air and process them through their leaves, but they also do so through their roots in the soil. But more importantly, it's the way the roots can foster the development of bacteria and microorganisms in the soil, and then it's those things that symbiotically really charge it up. So you know, plants growing in soil can really pull a lot of pollutants out of the water, out of the air, and process them and very effectively, more effectively than we ever thought possible. So these structures, you know, I always thought they were super beneficial, and only now is science and research backing into just how beneficial they are. I've also got some research studies by the Landscape Architecture Department at University of Illinois, where they cite the effects of green space and a view of green space on children's test scores in the classroom setting. And it's a really cool study done in collaboration between the Landscape Architecture Department and the Psychology Department. And essentially, the gist of it is, you know, kids in a classroom with no window have a lot of stress, and their test scores are lower than kids that have a window. And then again, the best test scores are kids that have a window that looks onto green space, or they have some green space right there close at hand. Those actually have the best test scores. So, and there's just, if you want to look around, there's no shortage of material out there that points to how beneficial plants in a vertical or near vertical application in these, you know, as an alternate to regular structures, benefit all of us. All right, well, it looks like I'm going to close this out. There's no more questions. Please connect with me on LinkedIn and other social media outlets. I'd love to continue to be a resource for all of you, and I hope if you've got any projects, you'll reach out to us. So thank you very much. Take care.